Hello, my name is Ian M. Walker, and welcome to my vocal booth. I am an aspiring voice actor, and I thought that I would take this opportunity to create an introductory video. And I thought the subject ought to be the journey that my accent has taken. So here we go. I was born in Wallasey, which is on the Wirral, or Cheshire. It's gone through a few names, but it's right across the River Mersey from Liverpool, which of course is much more familiar to people. Liverpudlians have what's known as the Scouse accent, and the people across the river where I'm from, Wallasey and the Wirral, they tend to have a very similar accent. And in fact, these days it's sometimes indistinguishable. But a lot of them would say that their accent is a little more refined, which isn't always true, of course, but there you go. Just a bit of a joke. So that's where I was born, and that's the accent I should have picked up. However, I had a great influence in my life, which was my nan, my grandmother, who was herself excellent at English. She used to write poetry, and she strongly encouraged me and motivated me to do well at English at school and to speak well. And that stayed with me, and it ended up being that my top two subjects at school were English literature and English language. And I've always had a love of language since then, or particularly, of course, of the English language and how it can be used. The romance of it, the breadth of it, not so much the evolution of it, or is it evolution? I've been here too long, because some of the changes I'm not so keen on, but there you go. I then moved, at 17, I moved down to London for a few months, and then to Brighton, and I ended up being in Brighton for 6 years. And there came a time, I don't know how long I'd been there, but my mum and my sister Karen came down to visit me, and in rather joking and mocking terms they pointed out to me that I was starting to sound like a bit of a southerner. So I'd already gone from really not sounding very much like my peers or even some of my family because of the influence of my nan, so sometimes already being called a bit of a snob, to now sounding like a southerner, which was, that's such a crime to northerners, and that's definitely somebody trying to be a snob or posh, because London these days especially has so much influence on its accents. You know, it's quite the metropolis, but Brighton, they tend to think and joke and sometimes even believe that their accent, their southern accent, although they're all southern accents, that their accent is rather more refined. In fact, someone close to me, my boyfriend, in fact, would agree with that. He lives in London now, but he said he had to change his accent a little because he sounded too posh. So they mockingly pointed out that I was now starting to sound like a southerner. I hadn't noticed it. I was using the soft A instead of the hard A, and the soft U instead of the hard U. So, for example, they would say, it's not grass, it's grass. And it's not glass, it's glass. It's not bus, it's bus. And it's not brush, it's brush. So there you go. Quite the change. From that moment on, I became more aware or more observant of how I sound, and also it just became an interest of mine to really pay attention to other people, to accents, to the idiosyncrasies with their voices. And I've always had an ear. If I'm watching a film, I don't have a high bar for how good a film has to be. It just has to keep me engaged. But if I'm watching a film, one of the worst things for me is if I can hear that somebody is putting an accent on, or that they're just changing their accent or changing their voice some way, and so it doesn't sound natural. That's worse to me than, I don't know, bad cinematography or anything else, or bad acting even, because I have that ear for it. So that's led me into trying my hand at this voice acting thing. No, I shouldn't put it like that, because it's actually something, after many, many years of being in corporate work, this is something that's lit a fire in my belly. So it's something that I am going to be successful at. I'm a book editor at the moment as well. But obviously what I want to really do is just make my living from primarily audiobooks, and perhaps ads. But since I've been a gamer for as long as I can remember, since I was a little kid, little kid, I would also, my ultimate dream would be to have a character in a game. Anyway, that leads me to what was supposed to be the end of the journey of my accent. I spent 6 years in Brighton, as I said, and then at 23 I came over to first New York, and I spent a few months there, and then travelled across the top of the US all the way through various states and cities, and then up the western parts of Canada, which was gorgeous, and spent some time in Washington State with a lovely family that I stayed with. And then by the time I got to California, I had realized that rather than continue on along the south, which had been my intention, and then back to England, I wanted to stay. I arrived in New York July 2nd, 1992. So that means I've now been in the States, July 1st, July 1st was 23 years, which felt rather odd, that anniversary in particular, because it means I've spent the same amount of time in England as I have now in the States. And the first audiobook I've been commissioned to do is all American characters set in America. And after 23 years, well, so to 21, 22 in LA, and then the rest of the time traveling around. After all this time here, you would think, or I even thought, well, that should be easy. And it hasn't been proving to be so. The author loves my natural speaking voice, which is what I'll be using for the narrative, thankfully. But for the characters, since they are obviously in America, it's all set in America, and they obviously are American, I've been trying my hand at the American accents. And an influence of mine, or no, someone I admire very much, whose videos I've been watching, whose warm-up video I always use before any of my work on my book or any auditions, though I didn't use it today because I wanted to make sure that you're just getting my rough, ready, natural voice, is a lady named Amy Walker. No relation, as far as we know, but she is not only adorable, but extremely talented. Absolutely, I've just been agog at how well she does everything. She has a website, I'll put it down below, but it's 21accents.com, and she gives some free tutorials, and of course she offers courses. And the warm-up, as I said, is wonderful. I'll probably link that for you as well. But she can just have a conversation in 30-odd accents with you. And she and I spoke, and she told me the problem has been that I've resisted taking on the American accent. And that's absolutely true. Because I think probably at first it was, again, my lovely mocking family telling me, "You sound like a bloody Yank," which I know some of you won't take kindly to, but there you go. And then after that, it was realizing that having a British accent in the United States can be quite the boon, quite the perk, believe it or not. It seems we're usually quite respected. In fact, we're regarded as quite intelligent, sophisticated, and quite rightly so, obviously. Just enthralling to some people. So, with all that, I actually did try to resist the American accent, just as I did once I realised I was sliding into a southern accent in England. And now, of course, all these years later, I'm finding it became so intrinsic to resist the accent, I'm actually finding it difficult to do an American accent, but I'm working on it. So, in conclusion, my accent has gone from not quite the rough Scouse accent, which is very sing-song, and it's very powerful. It has a lot of, like I said, bus and bus brush. So it has Irish influences because of all the Irish immigrants in the past, and there's a sort of a throaty sound to it often. So there'll be words like "me chicken," "where's me chicken," "where's me dinner." So I never really had that accent. Only recently, in fact, on an audition, found that it was even in me at all, which was quite amusing to my family. I seem to amuse them a lot with my voice and accents. So it went from that to, well, I don't know if I can even still do a Brighton accent, but it would be a little more up here and a little more of the pronunciation, certainly the here. In fact, I'm reminding myself now of Patrick Stewart, and he's not from the south, although he has such a fantastic voice, but he's obviously spent a lot of time down there. And it has the nuances, and it has the soft A, as opposed to, could I do a London accent? Oh. I should have thought of all this before I started, but I wanted it just to be generic and organic. No, I'm not even going to attempt it. Anyway, so now it's ended up being whatever this is. To Americans, I still sound British, and thankfully my author likes it and says I sound British enough without it being so thick that the audience wouldn't even be able to understand it. So, I don't know what it's called, but that's just my accent. And now I'm trying to smooth it out a little, just give it that little bit of a drawl. It's so relaxed. Amy's been teaching me to do a lot of the lifting of your mouth into a kind of a smile, so you get that natural sound, because the American accent seems to be down here, whereas the British is more up here. And as Amy tells us, whereas the French is down here. Wow, going off on a tangent. We Brits do that. Anyway, I did actually want to make this short, so hopefully you're still awake. And this has been the introduction and the story of the journey of my accent. I purposely didn't try to do any voices, though I am having to learn some. The book I'm working on actually has zombie voices, which is interesting and sometimes painful. All right, I'll do one. I have one that speaks from down here, as though she has a hole in her throat from too much smoking. And wow, I should have lubricated before I did that. With water, of course, because that hurt a little. Anyway, you get the idea. This was just supposed to be my accent. And perhaps, if anybody's interested, I'll do a follow-up when I'm a tad more skilled at doing various voices. If you have any questions, pop them down below. Can't imagine that you would, but just in case you do. And as I said, I will list Amy's site, and of course I should list my ACX profile, which is where the audiobooks are made, and my website or Facebook pages. And I hope you haven't been too bored. And last thing is, if I can help anyone else who's trying to break into this, who's also a newbie like me, those would certainly be pertinent questions. And if you're in LA and you need an audio booth, I can rent this out, I suppose. So anyway, I'm babbling, so I'm off. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Ian M. Walker, signing off.